Chapter 16. Almost as soon as Solangi and Damien had left the cruiser, they felt the boat move out of its mooring. Daniel didn't wait. He climbed the stairs up to the upper deck and went to join Damienos at the helm.
"Glad you could join me, Daniel," he said, smiling at the young man. "As you're probably aware, cats have this terrible aversion to water. Except when it's to catch a fish at the end of a stream, of course. And since things haven't changed in a millennia in that regard, I would much prefer if you took the helm."
He turned his head to Daniel only to see a broad grin stretch across his face. "You've got it, Skipper. I've always wanted to pilot one of these. Thank you." And again, not waiting for directives or explanation, Daniel stepped in front of Damienos and grabbed the helm. One could say that he was in his element. Damienos watched him maneuver the cruiser out of the port and head to sea with the ease of an old seafarer. He then sat down in the seat next to the helm and began examining the weather map, the navigation gauges, and radio components. Once he knew they were heading southward along the coast without any problem, Damienos left Daniel to his duty, but not before saying,
"Okay, son, you're doing fine. Just keep the same heading along the coast until you're inside of Hollywood Beach. After that, you'll see, okay?"
"Aye, aye, Captain," Daniel replied enthusiastically. He loved this, the ocean breeze warm and gently brushing past his face, the smell of the open waters. In fact, everything was perfect. Yet he knew this was not a pleasure cruise that had a given destination. It was a journey into the unknown with only one objective, to find his father. Below deck, meanwhile, Malou, Gabby and Stefano were sitting around the table, still analysing the words of the latest riddle. Why writing Fort and Key in capital letters? That's what I'd like to know, Stefano said, staring down at the notepad. How about if Fort meant a place by that name, like Fort Lauderdale? Gabby asked. I think you're right, Gabby. We've actually left Fort Lauderdale behind already, Malou said. And now we've got to find that key, right? She looked at each of her children in turn. They both nodded. You're right, Mum, Stefano said. But which key are we talking about?
"I think you'll find your answer on this map,"
Damienos said, laying a sea chart on the table. He tapped a finger on the South Florida coastline.
"We'll be stopping in Hollywood," he pointed to the name on the map, "in a little while to have something to eat. And then, if the weather holds up, we'll sail to Miami Beach in the morning."
That's it. There's the key, Stefano exclaimed, putting his middle finger on Key Largo. You mean Dad should be in Key Largo? Malou asked, visibly surprised at the possibility of finding her husband in that town. Yes, Mum, that's what the word key means. I'm sure of it, Stefano insisted. That fits the riddle in any case, Gabby agreed, sounding unconvinced though. Malou looked up at Damienos. He was standing at her back. Do you think that's it?
I don't know, Malou. The best way to find out is to go there, I suppose.
Why aren't you snapping your fingers and transport us there then? Gabby asked. Damienos scuffed.
Because it doesn't work that way. For now, I only know that we have to follow the coastline. There must be something we should find out while we do that, and that's why I can't snap my fingers right now.
The image of Nicole still encumbered Dan's mind as he went to bed. He was seeing her as he remembered her, but those images were not of a young woman. They were those of a mother with children running around in a garden. Before falling asleep this time, Dan touched his amulet. For some reason it felt warm and comforting. He smiled to himself and said quietly, Wherever you are, Nicole, I hope you're the happiest woman in heaven. I can't possibly know why at the moment, but I feel that you see me and understand what I'm saying. And since this dream catcher should let you into my dreams, why don't you come for a visit when you have time, okay? He smiled and closed his eyes. A few minutes, or it only seemed to be a few minutes, later, Dan opened his eyes to see a figure appear to him. He recognized her instantly, although she seemed transparent somehow. It was Nicole. Her strawberry blonde curls surrounded her gorgeous face as an aureole of happiness. She was strikingly beautiful, and still is, Dan thought, as he peered at the woman before him. Her words were soft as a caress. Dearest Dan, she began, I have only a few seconds to tell you. I will be beside you always, and that Malou will find you. And now sleep tight, my brother. Be at peace. And then her image disappeared from in front of Dan's eyes. He smiled and felt at peace, as Nicole had suggested. For the first time since this whole ordeal had begun, he now knew that Malou would find him, and returning home was just a matter of time. They were all on deck when Daniel steered the cruiser to its moorage in Hollywood Beach. Well done, son, Malou said, as they all disembarked on the quay. I didn't know you had it in you. If you mean piloting a boat like this, I didn't, Mum. It just happened, Daniel replied, grinning from ear to ear. I bet Damienos had something to do with it, didn't he? Malou said, looking up at their cat.
Let's just say it was about time to put him at the helm, Damienos replied, chuckling.
And you said you found the key in the riddle, Daniel said. shooting a quick glance at Stefano. I guess we found the key, but it doesn't mean it's the right one. What are you saying then? Daniel questioned. All we could work out was that Key is the name of a town or a place along the south coast, but we haven't got any proof that Key Largo is the right key, Gabby put in, as they continued walking toward the end of the quay. What would we need to prove to ourselves that Key Largo is the right place then?
Memories, Daniel, Damianos replied. As I said before, your father went to a place that means something to him, and at a time that represented some important event in his life, so we need to find what that event was in order to confirm the place and vice versa.
But, and again, Damianos, why don't you transport us to Key Largo right now, so that we could find out what happened to Dad? Gabby insisted.
And again, Gabby, all I have been instructed to do was to take you along the coast, which I am sure will be revealing to you somehow.
Yes, I think it's best to take one step or one port at a time, Malou concluded. That way we won't miss something important or something that God wants us to discover in the meantime. What about these memories you mentioned, Damianos? Are they memories of what we did around here with Dad? Is that what you mean?
Yes, Daniel, the memories you and your mother have of your life or of the time you spent with your dad around here will probably give you the proof you need to pinpoint the place where your father has landed.
Damianos, we were not born 25 years ago. How can we remember anything that happened then? I think what Damianos means, Gabby, Malou said, is that all of us have memories of what Dad has told us about his years in college, for example. All of a sudden, Malou stopped talking and stopped walking. What's the matter, Mum? Did you remember something? Daniel asked. Yes, I did. It's about your dad in college and his professor. She steered her gaze in Damianos' direction. Do you remember us going to visit Professor Hugo when we had to accomplish our last task about commitment?
Yes, I remember, Malou, Damianos replied. But what's important here is what you remember of him. So what is it?
Why don't we go to the restaurant and talk about it around a large plate of seafood? Malou suggested, returning to walking out of the marina. As she did, Stefano, Daniel and Gabby seemed to be at a loss. This was a memory that was way before their time. They exchanged a glance and somehow agreed tactically not to question their mother until they had eaten something. They were starving, actually. Once they were all seated around a table that afforded them an all-encompassing view of the seashore and in front of a humongous plate of every type of crustaceans imaginable, Malou said, Okay, here is what I remember of your dad's college days. She grabbed a prawn, looked at it, dipped it in the tartar sauce bowl and sucked it off its tail. After a visibly delightful swallow, she resumed, I was introduced to Professor Hugo. You mean as in Uncle Fabio, Mum? Daniel interrupted. Exactly. Professor Hugo was your dad's tutor for many years, and although Fabio was older than your dad, both men struck a lasting friendship in college. But what's interesting about this story is that Fabio and your dad wanted more than anything in the world to become Navy officers, like Fabio's dad. Professor Hugo had been a Navy officer, a captain, I believe, in Venezuela. Did they ever enroll for training then? Stefano asked. Oh yes, but only after they finished college. They actually went on an orientation course in Fort Lauderdale and were supposed to take their training in. Malou stopped in mid-sentence, her mouth agape. Oh my God, why didn't I think of it earlier? They had to take their training in Key West. She looked around the table. Damiano smiled and nodded. That's it then, Daniel and Stefano exclaimed in unison, looking at each other, chuckling and high-fiving in a noisy clap of their hands. It's not Key Largo that we need to go, it's Key West, isn't it, Mum? Daniel added. That's fantastic, Mum, Gabby rejoined. And you know, I think you're right, because if you look at that first riddle, she brought her beach bag to her lap and fetched the notepad out of it. It said that we should find the cardinal points of his destination, which could mean west, once we found the key, right? She looked at her mum for approval.
I think you're right, Gabby, Damiano said, grinning now.
But what are we still doing along the south coast then? Daniel asked, obviously impatient to get to Key West.
In my experience, none of God's plans are ever a waste, Damianos replied. So there must be something else for you to find or discover before we are to reach Key West.
Any idea what that might be, Mum? Daniel asked. None at this point, but that's not to say that I won't remember something else on the way, though. She smiled at her children. But for now, why don't we do justice to that plate? Everything is absolutely delicious.